What happens when the man you married sees you as a trophy, but treats you as a burden? For Elara Vance, her marriage to the ambitious Julian Thorne was a quiet compromise. She lived simply, hiding a secret legacy to honor her father's wishes, while Julian climbed the social ladder, craving the validation of Miami's elite. But at the most exclusive yacht party of the season, Julian's ambition and cruelty collide. In a desperate attempt to impress his powerful friends, he publicly mocks his wife, calling her poor and simple. He has no idea that the woman he just humiliated doesn't just belong at the party. She could buy it, the yacht, and everyone on it. His single, cruel sentence is about to cost him everything. The thick, cream-colored cardstock felt heavy in Julian Thorne's hand. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a key. Embossed in gold leaf, the insignia of Donovan Reed, the tech mogul who had practically reinvented logistics, shimmered under the halogen lights of their sterile, high-rise apartment. An evening aboard the Olympian. This was it. This was the night that would cement his new status. Julian practiced his smile in the reflection of the glass balcony door. The Miami skyline glittered back at him, 1,000 rivals, 1,000 opportunities. He adjusted his silk tie, a deep sapphire blue that he'd been told brought out the predator in his eyes. He was a man on the rise, a partner at a boutique private equity firm, and he looked the part. All he needed was to land the Sterling account, and this party was the hunting ground. He turned his gaze inward to the living room, where his wife, Elara, was reading a book. She was, as always, an enigma of simplicity. She wore a simple linen dress, her dark hair was tied back, and she was lost in some history of maritime navigation. It was this simplicity that had first drawn him to her. He'd met her at a museum benefit. He, a rising star, and she, he'd assumed, a quiet, impressed volunteer. She was beautiful, but more importantly, she was uncomplicated. She required no maintenance, had no ambitious family, and seemed perfectly content to orbit his world. She was the perfect, unassuming accessory for a man like him. Lately, however, that simplicity had begun to grate on him. It felt less like humility, and more like a lack of drive. It felt poor. "Elara, are you even getting ready?" he snapped, the invitation tapping against his thigh. Elara looked up, her expression placid. "Of course, Julian. The boat doesn't even launch for 2 hours. I was just finishing this chapter." "It's not a boat, Elara, for God's sake. It's a 200-foot mega yacht. It's the Olympian. Do you have any idea who will be there? Victoria Sterling will be there." He said the name with a reverence that bordered on absurd. "That's nice," Elara said, placing a simple leather bookmark between the pages. "I'm sure she'll be lovely." Julian scoffed, walking over to their bedroom closet. He pulled open his side, a meticulous row of dark suits and designer shirts. He then glanced at her side. It was functional. Simple sheath dresses, practical blouses. He felt a flash of genuine anger. "You're not wearing that, are you?" He gestured to the book in her lap. "I was planning on wearing the navy blue dress, the one you said you liked. The one from a department store, to Donovan Reed's party?" "Absolutely not." He pulled out a black, sequined number he'd bought her last Christmas, a frantic purchase after he'd forgotten their anniversary. "Wear this, and the diamonds I got you. Try to look like you belong." Elara's gaze hardened, just for a second. It was a subtle shift, like a deep-sea current changing direction, unseen on the surface. "The navy dress is fine, Julian. It's elegant." "It's safe, Elara. It's dull. Tonight is not about being safe. It's about being seen." He threw the sequined dress onto the bed. "I'm closing the Sterling deal tonight. Their entire shipping fleet needs restructuring, and I'm the man to do it. Victoria, her father, they need to see that I'm one of them, that we are one of them. I can't have my wife looking like she won a competition to be there." The cruelty in his voice was casual, honed by months of similar, smaller paper cuts. He was no longer the charming, attentive man who had wooed her with promises of a shared life. He was a man consumed by reflections, by the appearance of success, rather than the substance of it. Ilara stood up slowly. She was taller than he often remembered, and her posture, usually relaxed, straightened to something rigid. "I will be ready in an hour, Julian. I will wear the navy dress. It was a gift from my father." "Your father? The man who ran some boat repair shed?" Julian rolled his eyes. "Fine. Whatever. Just try to blend in. Don't talk about your volunteer work at the museum. Don't talk about old books. And please just smile and nod. Let me handle the conversation." He went into the bathroom to fix his hair, missing the look in his wife's eyes. It was not anger, and it was not hurt. It was the cold, clear look of a CEO making a final, difficult decision. She had hoped this moment would never come. She had tried, for 2 years, to honor her promise, to live a normal life, to find love with a man who wasn't blinded by the name Vance. Her father, Robert Vance, hadn't run a boat repair shed. He had built Vance Maritime Solutions, a colossus of the industry, a shipyard that built and refitted everything from naval destroyers to the very mega yachts the new money crowd adored. When he passed, he left her everything, with one dying wish. Don't let the money own you, Ilara. Live a real life. Find someone who loves you, not the balance sheet. Hide it until you know for sure. She had tried. She had met Julian, who seemed so different, so driven by his own merits. She had fallen for the idea of him. But tonight, listening to him drip venom and ambition, she realized her father's test had just yielded its final, definitive result. Julian Thorne hadn't just failed. He had failed spectacularly. She picked up her phone and sent a single text message to a number not saved under any name. "Marcus. Change of plans. I will be at the Reed party tonight. Please be there. It's time." The reply was instantaneous. "Acknowledged, Miss Vance." She laid the navy dress out on the bed. It was a simple, bespoke silk gown from a designer whose name Julian wouldn't recognize, but Victoria Sterling absolutely would. It was the color of the deep ocean, and it had cost more than Julian's last 2 bonuses combined. He just didn't have the eye to see it. He saw the world in sequins and brand names. He had no idea what real, quiet power looked like. The launch boat cut through the dark waters of Biscayne Bay, its twin engines a throaty hum. The air was thick with salt and money. Julian was electric, vibrating with nervous energy. He'd barely spoken to Ilara on the drive to the marina, too busy rehearsing his talking points for Victoria's father, muttering about leverage and logistics. Ilara sat beside him, a portrait of calm, her hands folded in her lap. As the Olympian came into view, even Julian was forced into a stunned silence. It wasn't a yacht. It was a floating skyscraper. Lights cascaded down its white hull, illuminating 3 separate decks, a helicopter pad, and a glass-walled swimming pool on the stern. Staff in crisp white uniforms stood ready at the boarding platform. "My God," Julian breathed, his eyes wide. This is real power." "No, it's not," Ilara thought, her gaze analytical. "It's just a boat, a very large, very complex boat. I know the man who designed the stabilization system. He owes me a favor." They stepped aboard onto a teak deck polished to a mirror shine. A string quartet played softly near a cascading champagne fountain. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of oysters and caviar. And the crowd, It was a glittering sea of Miami's most powerful. Tech billionaires, real estate tycoons, and old money matriarchs all mingled, their laughter light and sharp. Julian immediately transformed. His shoulders squared, his rehearsed smile clicked into place. He grabbed 2 glasses of champagne, handed one to Elara without looking at her, and scanned the crowd. "There, that's Victoria," he hissed, nodding toward the aft deck. Victoria Sterling was the absolute center of her own universe. She was stunning in a fire-engine red dress that left little to the imagination, her blonde hair swept up in a complex, dazzling style. She was surrounded by a coterie of admirers, laughing loudly at something one of them had said. She was, Elara noted, the exact opposite of herself. She was loud, where Elara was quiet. She was obvious, where Elara was subtle. "Julian, darling," Victoria shrieked, spotting him. She air-kissed him, her eyes flicking over to Elara and dismissing her in the same microsecond. "You made it. And you brought—" "My wife, Elara," Julian said, his voice a fraction too hearty. "Elara, this is Victoria Sterling, of Sterling Shipping." "A pleasure to meet you," Elara said, offering a polite smile. Victoria's eyes did a slow, insulting inventory of Elara, from her simple hair to her unadorned neck, and finally to the deep blue dress. There was a flash of recognition in Victoria's eyes. She, unlike Julian, recognized the designer, and it was followed by a flash of confusion. Why would this mousy woman be in a gown like that? She must have borrowed it. "Charmed," Victoria said, the word dripping with insincerity. "Julian, Daddy is over by the bar. He's dying to talk about your proposal. He finds it adorable." She linked her arm through Julian's. "Let's go, shall we? We can leave your +1 here to explore." She looks like she enjoys a good buffet. The insult was so overt, so brazen, that even Julian flinched. But the pull of the Sterling deal was stronger than any loyalty to his wife. Yes, of course. He gave Elara a panicked, apologetic glance. "You'll be okay, right, Elara? Just mingle." He let Victoria pull him away, his back rigid. Elara watched him go, feeling not a shred of jealousy, only a profound, cold pity. He was a fish swimming desperately toward a lure, blind to the hook. She turned away from the crowd and walked toward the railing, looking out not at the party, but at the dark, industrial sprawl of the port of Miami. The lights of the gantry cranes moved like giant, patient spiders. And there, in the center of it all, was the massive, floodlit complex of Vance Maritime Solutions, her shipyard. From here, she could see the dry dock where a U.S. Navy destroyer was currently undergoing a billion-dollar refit. She could see the glowing torch of a night shift welder, a tiny spark of real work in a world of glittering illusion. "It's an impressive view, isn't it?" A man had come to stand beside her. He was older, in a perfectly tailored but unremarkable grey suit. He had a kind, tired face and watchful eyes. "Marcus," Elara said, her voice low. "Thank you for coming." Marcus Cole, COO of Vance Maritime, nodded. "I wouldn't miss it, Ms. Vance. Donovan Reed," he gestured to the party's host, "has been trying to get me to one of these for a year. He's a good client." "He is," Elara agreed. "His new logistics fleet. We're building all 12 hulls." "He doesn't know, does he?" Marcus asked, looking at her. "That the Elara Vance who signs the checks is the Elara Thorne standing here? No. He just knows my father's COO. As per my father's wishes, the Vance family stays out of the spotlight. You're the face, Marcus. You always have been." "I wish I was happy to honor," Marcus said, his voice softening. "But Robert, he never would have wanted you to be unhappy. He never would have tolerated a man like that. He nodded discreetly toward Julian, who was now laughing obsequiously at something Victoria's father, a gruff man named Henry, was saying. "I know," Elara said, her voice tight. "I needed to be sure. I needed to know if he loved me, or the life I could have given him. It turns out he doesn't love me, and he's just angry I'm not giving him that life." "So the storm protocol?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yes. Is everything in place?" "As of 4 p.m. today," Marcus confirmed, checking his watch. "The acquisition of Sterling Shipping's outstanding debt was finalized. We bought it from the Singaporean bank for 40 cents on the dollar. Henry Sterling doesn't know it yet, but as of this moment, you are his bank, and he's in default." "And Julian's firm?" "Even easier. Your husband, I'm afraid, is a very poor gambler. He leveraged his firm to the hilt on a bad currency speculation. The trust your father set up for you, the one Julian doesn't know about, has been quietly buying his debt for months. He's personally liable for, well, everything." A cold knot of finality settled in Elara's stomach. This was the point of no return. "So he's ruined." "He will be," Marcus said. "All it takes is one call from our lawyers." Elara watched her husband. He was posturing, gesticulating wildly, explaining some concept to Henry Sterling, who looked profoundly bored. Julian was so busy performing success that he hadn't noticed he had already failed. "Not yet," Elara said. "I want him to have his moment. I want him to get everything he thinks he wants. Let him believe he's won." "That's a cruel game, Elara," Marcus observed, though not unkindly. "He's a cruel man," Elara replied, turning back to the lights of her shipyard. "He just doesn't know it yet. He thinks it's ambition. Let him have his night. I'll have the rest of my life." An hour later, Julian was floating. He was drunk, not on champagne, but on proximity to power. He and Victoria had been inseparable. Their conversation, a rapid-fire exchange of names, places, and veiled financial gossip. Henry Sterling had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "I like your style, Thorne. We'll talk Monday." He had made it. He was in. He found Elara exactly where he'd left her, by the railing, staring at the port. She was holding the same, untouched glass of champagne. He felt a sudden, sharp surge of resentment. He had just conquered the world, and she was moping. She hadn't even tried to network. She was an anchor, a dead weight on his ascent. Victoria sashayed up beside him, her eyes sharp. "Is she all right, Julian? She hasn't moved all night. Is she intimidated?" "She's fine," Julian slurred, louder than he intended. "She's just not used to this." "Clearly," Victoria said, her voice a purr. She raised her voice just enough for the surrounding guests to tune in. "That's a sweet dress, Elara. Did you make it?" A few people snickered. Elara turned, her face a polite, unreadable mask. "It's a Gaultier," she said simply. Victoria's smile faltered. She knew the name. "Oh, a vintage piece, then. How frugal." Julian, sensing he was losing the upper hand and desperate to realign himself with Victoria, stepped forward. He felt the need to perform, to show Victoria and the others that he was one of them, that he saw Elara through their eyes. "Darling, don't be rude," Julian said to Victoria, before turning the knife on his wife. "Elara doesn't care about fashion. She's simpler than that." He reached out and, in a gesture of profound contempt, flicked the sleeve of her dress. "She's my little charity project, aren't you, Elara? Keeps me humble." The small circle of listeners laughed. Elara's face remained perfectly still, but her eyes, her very dark, very deep eyes, locked on his. "Julian, don't," she said, her voice a low warning. But he was too far gone, fueled by alcohol and the intoxicating approval of Victoria Sterling. He wanted to finalize his allegiance. He wanted to sever the tie to his simple life. "It's true," he announced to the group. "I found her volunteering at the Maritime Museum, dusting off old ship models. Can you believe it? She doesn't have an ambitious bone in her body." He leaned in, as if sharing a conspiratorial secret, but his voice carried across the deck. "I have to be honest, it's refreshing. In a world full of sharks, it's nice to have a little guppy. She's just, poor. Not just in money, but in spirit. No fire, no drive. But she's pretty, isn't she?" There it was. The word, poor. It hung in the humid air, stark and ugly. The laughter around them died, replaced by a few uncomfortable coughs. Even Victoria looked slightly taken aback by the raw, public cruelty. Julian had crossed a line. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public disavowal. He had, in effect, drawn a line in the sand, placing himself on the side of the glitterati and casting his wife onto the other. Elara didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held his gaze. The silence stretched, becoming louder than the music, louder than the waves lapping against the hull. She looked past Julian to the people gathered around him. She saw their expressions: pity, embarrassment, and a strange, cold curiosity. They were waiting for the scene, for the tears. Instead, Elara straightened her spine. She set her untouched champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray. She looked at Julian, not as a wife, but as a stranger. "Is that what you think of me, Julian?" she asked, her voice clear and carrying. "Elara, don't make a scene," he hissed, his buzz rapidly fading, replaced by the cold fear that he'd miscalculated. "No," Elara said, her voice gaining a resonance it had never had before. "I believe you are the one making the scene." She looked at Victoria Sterling. "You're trying to restructure your father's debt. Julian is proposing a hostile takeover of your smaller competitors, funded by new bonds." Victoria's jaw dropped. "How could you possibly? And you, Julian," Elara continued, her voice like ice. "You think Henry Sterling is going to talk on Monday. You think you've won." "Elara, shut up," Julian whispered, his face turning pale. "You're drunk." "I haven't had a drink all night." She looked around at the silent, watching guests. "My husband mocked me for being poor. He mocked me for being simple. He mocked me for having no ambition." She took a step toward him. He instinctively took a step back. "You're right about one thing, Julian," she said. "I am simple. I believe in loyalty. I believe in promises. And I believe in finishing what my father started." She turned her back on him and walked toward the main salon, where Donovan Reed, the host, was standing near the microphone, looking deeply uncomfortable. She walked straight past him, up the few steps to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing. They stopped, their bows hovering over their strings. "What is she doing?" Victoria whispered, horrified. "She's lost her mind," Julian muttered, moving to intercept her. But before he could, Marcus Cole stepped into his path, a large, solid, immovable object. "I wouldn't, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice polite. "Get out of my way, you," Julian spat. "No!" Elara stood on the stage, overlooking the entire party. She wasn't a mousy, simple woman anymore. She was something else entirely. She waited, perfectly still, until every eye was on her. The music had stopped. The only sound was the thrum of the yacht's engines. This wasn't the plan. The plan, as conceived by Elara and Marcus, was a quiet, legal dismantling. A series of phone calls on Monday morning. A bloodless coup executed by lawyers in sterile boardrooms. Julian would have been served divorce papers and foreclosure notices simultaneously, a neat, tidy end to his delusions. But his public cruelty had demanded a public response. Her father had built his company on a bedrock of respect for his workers, his clients, and his own name. Julian hadn't just insulted Ilara. He had insulted the Vance legacy by treating his wife as a disposable accessory. Standing on that stage, Ilara wasn't thinking about her humiliation. She was thinking about the first time her father had taken her to the shipyard. She was 8 years old, and he'd placed a welder's helmet on her head and let her watch a team fuse 2 massive plates of steel. "This is what we do, Ilara," his voice had echoed in the helmet. "We take strong things, and we put them together to build something even stronger. Something that can withstand any storm. You remember that." She had spent her life withstanding storms. This was just another. She scanned the crowd. She saw Julian, his face a mottled mask of rage and confusion, being blocked by Marcus. She saw Victoria Sterling, her smugness replaced by a dawning, frantic calculation. She saw the host, Donovan Reed, staring at her, his billionaire's brain finally putting 2 and 2 together. He had seen Marcus Cole's name on Shipyard contracts, and now he was seeing Marcus act as a bodyguard for Julian Thorne's simple wife. Ilara took a deep breath. She didn't need the microphone. Her voice, trained by years of addressing shareholders and union leaders in cavernous halls, all under the radar, all as her father's proxy, was clear and strong. "Good evening, everyone. My apologies for interrupting." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. This was better than they could have hoped. "My name is Ilara Vance. For the past 2 years, many of you have known me as Ilara Thorne, Julian Thorne's wife." She paused, letting the name Vance settle in the air. To most, it meant nothing. To the real players, to Donovan Reed, to Henry Sterling, to the shipping bankers in the corner, it was a tectonic plate shifting. Vance, as in Vance Maritime Solutions. "My husband," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "just made a speech. He informed you all that I am poor, simple, and without ambition. He called me his charity project." She locked eyes with Julian. "I am here to correct the record." Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't Ilara. This was someone he had never seen before. "Ilara, stop this! You're embarrassing yourself!" he shouted. "No, Julian, I'm embarrassing you." She turned her attention to the host. "Donovan, thank you for inviting us tonight. The Olympian is a magnificent vessel. My engineers were particularly proud of the new stabilization system we installed during her refit at our facility last quarter. I hope she's running smoothly." Donovan Reed's face went white. The refit had cost $80 million. He had negotiated it personally with Marcus Cole, who had repeatedly mentioned the owner was a stickler for details. He looked from Ilara to Marcus and back again. "Ilara, Vance," he said, the name clicking into place. "My God." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Ilara then turned her gaze to Victoria Sterling. "Victoria, you were concerned about my dress. You called it frugal. It is. I prefer to be frugal with my personal luxuries so that I can be generous in my business dealings." "What are you talking about?" Victoria snapped, her bravado crumbling. "I'm talking about your father's company, Sterling Shipping," Ilara said. "A fine old line company. Unfortunately, it's leveraged to the point of bankruptcy. As of 4 p.m. today, Vance Maritime Solutions acquired the entirety of your $400 million debt portfolio from your creditors, which means, as of this moment, I own your father's company. You, your father, and your entire family. Victoria, you work for me." Victoria swayed, grabbing a railing for support. Her father, Henry, pushed through the crowd, his face purple. "That's impossible. Our deal was with a Singaporean bank, who were very happy to sell a non-performing asset," Marcus Cole called out from the floor. "The paperwork is at your office, Henry. You are in breach of covenant. We'll be calling a board meeting Monday to discuss the new management structure." The silence was absolute. The partygoers were frozen, watching the most brutal, efficient corporate execution they had ever witnessed. Finally, Elara turned her full, undivided attention to her husband. Julian was shaking. This was a nightmare. It was a prank. It was impossible. The mousy woman he'd married, the one he'd left at home so many nights, the one he'd just publicly destroyed, owned the Sterlings. "Julian," Elara said, and now her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any shout. "You came here tonight to land the Sterling account. You wanted to be a player. You wanted to impress them with your ambition." She took a step closer to the edge of the stage. "The problem, Julian, is that you have no ambition. You only have an appetite. You don't want to build anything. You just want to have things. You wanted to have me. You wanted to have the respect of these people." "Elara, please, what is this?" he begged, his voice cracking. "What are you doing?" "I'm answering your question," she said. "You mocked me for being poor. Julian, I am the sole owner and CEO of Vance Maritime Solutions. My father, Robert Vance, left it to me. The boat repair shed you so dismissively refer to is the single largest private employer in the state of Florida. This yacht we are standing on, it's my client's. The port you're looking at, it's my domain. The entire Sterling shipping fleet you were so desperate to advise, it's my new and most problematic asset." She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. "You called me poor. Julian, you are the poor one, and not just in spirit." This was the part she dreaded, and the part she knew was most necessary. The humiliation of her husband was a private matter that he had made sickeningly public, but his financial ruin was a public fact, one he had simply been hiding. You're lying," Julian stammered, his eyes darting around for an ally. He found none. The faces of the guests were cold, fascinated. They were sharks, just as he'd said, and they smelled blood. His blood. You're a volunteer. I pay for our apartment. I pay for your life. Do you, Julian?" Elara asked, her voice laced with a sadness that was almost genuine. "Do you really?" She looked to Marcus, who gave a single, curt nod. "Let's talk about your firm, Thorn Capital," Elara said, her voice rising to project across the deck once more. "A boutique firm. So boutique, in fact, that it has been functionally insolvent for 8 months. Julian's breath hitched. That's a lie." "Is it?" Elara challenged. "Or is it true that you lost 70% of your client's capital on a disastrous yen trade in March? Is it true that you've been covering the losses by moving money between accounts, a move that the SEC would call, let's see, wire fraud? How? As I said, I'm a frugal person. I like to know where my money is going, especially when it's my money you've been losing." She let that statement hang in the air. Julian's mind, already reeling, tried to process the new information. His losses. Her money. "The apartment, Julian. The lease is in my name. The car you drive, it's registered to a holding company I own. Your suits, your watches, even your membership at the golf club. For the last 2 years, they have all been paid for. Not by your brilliant trades, but by a discretionary trust my father set up for me. A trust I've been drawing from to cover my husband's failures. She was dismantling him, piece by piece, in front of the very people he idolized. You didn't marry a charity project, Julian. You are one. My charity project. I was paying for the illusion of your success, waiting for the man I thought I married to show up, waiting for you to be honest with me, waiting for you to show a single shred of integrity. She shook her head, a gesture of final, profound disappointment. But you couldn't. You just kept digging, kept lying, and kept posturing. You thought you were a wolf, but you were just a scared little boy, spending his wife's allowance and insulting her to feel powerful. Julian Thorne crumpled. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, agonizing deflation. His shoulders slumped. His face, so arrogant just moments before, became the face of a terrified, cornered child. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, gray sheen. He looked from Ilara's cold, commanding face to Victoria's, which was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, directed entirely at him. He looked at Henry Sterling, who looked like he was about to have a stroke. He had not just failed to land the account. He had brought the woman who was about to destroy them all as his +1. Ilara, no, please, he whispered, taking a step toward the stage. I love you. I didn't mean it. It was the champagne. It was them. He pointed a shaking finger at Victoria. She made me say it. She doesn't understand us. It was the most cowardly, most pathetic defense possible. Victoria, who had just lost her family's empire, reacted with predictable venom. "You pig!" she shrieked, lunging at him, her hands clawed. "You brought this snake here to ruin me." "Get her off me," Julian yelped, stumbling backward. "Enough!" Ilara's voice cracked like a whip. Victoria froze. Julian froze. "Marcus," Ilara said. Marcus Cole stepped forward. "Mr. Reed," he said to the host, "my apologies for this unpleasantness. Miss Vance will, of course, compensate you for the disruption to your evening." No, of course not," Donovan Reed stammered, clearly awestruck. "This is... please, whatever you need." "We need security," Marcus said, "to escort Mr. Thorne off the vessel. He is no longer a guest of Miss Vance." "No!" Julian cried, a raw, desperate sound. "Ilara, you can't do this! It's me! It's Julian! We're married!" Ilara walked down from the stage, her simple navy dress rippling around her. She stopped directly in front of him. The entire party was silent, watching this final, brutal confrontation. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for any sign of the man she had once loved, any sign of remorse for his cruelty, not just for his consequences. She found nothing, only terror. "The marriage is over, Julian," she said, her voice quiet enough for only him to hear, though every guest strained to listen. "You will be served with divorce papers in the morning. Your accounts, which are all linked to mine, will be frozen as of midnight. The car is being repossessed tomorrow. The apartment, you have 48 hours to vacate. A moving company will pack your personal belongings and send them to... well, I'm sure you'll find somewhere to stay." "I'll have nothing," he gasped, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. You're destroying me." "No, Julian," Ilara said, her voice final. "You destroyed yourself. You just wanted an audience for it. And tonight, you got one." She turned to Marcus. "Please get him off my client's yacht." Two of Donovan Reed's large, private security guards, who had been standing discreetly by the salon doors, moved forward. They each took one of Julian's arms. "No, get your hands off me! Ilara, Ilara!" He was dragged, protesting and weeping, across the immaculate teak deck. The crowd parted for him, their faces a mixture of disgust and dark satisfaction. He was a fraud, and he had been exposed. There was no greater sin in their world. They took him to the service launch, not the grand mahogany boat he had arrived on, but the small, functional tender used by staff. As they bundled him onto the boat, he had one last wild look back at the party. Elara was already turned away from him. She was in a quiet, intense conversation with a pale Henry Sterling. She hadn't even watched him leave. His humiliation was so complete that it was already an afterthought. The launch's engine sputtered to life, and Julian Thorne was ferried away into the darkness, leaving the glittering, gilded cage and his wife behind. The party, for all intents and purposes, was over. The string quartet did not resume playing. The shocked whispers of the guests were the only soundtrack. Within minutes, the first launch boats were called. No one wanted to be the next person to draw the attention of Elara Vance. Victoria Sterling, after shooting Elara a look of such concentrated venom that it was almost impressive, had stormed off to find her father, who was now slumped in a deck chair, clutching his chest. Donovan Reed, the host, approached Elara tentatively. "Miss Vance, Elara, I am stunned and deeply impressed. Your father was a legend. It's clear his legacy is in formidable hands." Elara gave him a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Donovan. And again, my apologies for the scene. It was unavoidable." "Not at all," Reed said, his eyes glittering with the thrill of it all. "It was the most honest party I've ever hosted." He lowered his voice. "The refit. It was perfect. I have a new project, a fleet of autonomous container ships. I was going to put it out to tender, but I'd rather just give it to you." "Send the specs to Marcus's office," Elara said. "We'll have a proposal by end of week." "Done." He kissed her hand, a gesture of newfound, profound respect. "Good night, Miss Vance." "Good night, Donovan." As the yacht emptied, Elara was left standing at the rail with Marcus. The warm Miami air had a chill to it now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the hollow ache of what was, at its core, a profound failure. Her marriage, her trust. "Well," Marcus said, sipping a glass of water, "that was certainly more dramatic than a Monday morning phone call." Elara let out a long breath she felt she'd been holding for 2 years. "He made it public, Marcus. He put a price tag on my dignity. I just showed him he couldn't afford it." "And the Sterlings?" "Henry will cooperate," Elara said, watching the man being helped onto a boat by his daughter. "He has no choice. We'll restructure the company, replace the board, and absorb their fleet into our logistics division. It will be profitable within a year. Victoria, she will be the problem. Make sure her corporate accounts and access are frozen by morning." "Consider it done," Marcus said. He looked at his boss, her face illuminated by the distant city lights. "Robert would have been... well, he would have been furious you married that idiot. But he would have been damn proud of how you ended it." "I just want to go home, Marcus," Elara said. "Which one?" he asked gently. She smiled. Not the empty, polite smile she'd worn for Julian, but a real, small, tired smile. "The one by the water, the one my father built. The car is waiting at the marina." They took the launch back in silence. The city lights seemed sharper, the air cleaner. When they reached the marina, there was no sign of Julian. He was already a ghost, absorbed by the city that had no tolerance for high-profile failures. Instead of the black sedan Julian used, a different car was waiting, a simple, dark green Range Rover, old but impeccably maintained. It had been her father's. She got into the driver's seat. It felt right. "Will you be all right, Elara?" Marcus asked, his hand on the door. "I will be," she said, her voice firm. "This was a necessary correction, a chapter that needed to end." Tomorrow, the real work begins. I want to be at the shipyard at 6 a.m. We have a destroyer to deliver. I'll see you there, boss. Ilara drove away from the glittering high-rises of downtown. She left behind the sterile apartment that had never felt like a home. She drove south, past the glowing port, past her port, and toward the quiet, old-money enclave of Coconut Grove, where a sprawling, unpretentious house sat hidden behind a canopy of banyan trees. She walked in and the house was silent, smelling of old wood and the sea. She shed the navy blue dress, leaving it on the floor, and pulled on an old, soft t-shirt and sweatpants. She made a cup of tea and walked out onto the back terrace, which overlooked the dark, quiet bay. She had hidden herself for 2 years, trying to honor a promise, trying to find a man who wouldn't be defined by her wealth. She had failed to find the man, but she had, in the process, found herself again. The mask of the simple wife was gone, and she was left with the woman her father had raised, strong, capable, and in charge. The humiliation of the night faded, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Julian Thorne was a mistake, a painful, expensive, and deeply embarrassing mistake. But he was also a lesson. Never again would she make herself small to make a man feel big. Never again would she confuse ambition with appetite. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a financial wire. Donovan Reed announces exclusive, multi-billion-dollar autonomous shipping contract with Vance Maritime Solutions. Shares in competitors plummet. She smiled, a true, sharp smile this time. She sipped her tea as the sun began to hint at its arrival, painting the eastern sky in shades of grey and violet. It was a new day. 6 months to the day after the party aboard the Olympian, the Miami sun was just as bright. But the world had shifted on its axis. The air at Vance Maritime Solutions was filled with the sharp scent of ozone and salt, and the roar of industry was punctuated by a palpable sense of occasion. Ilara Vance stood on a raised platform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant ponytail. She wore no jewelry, save for her father's simple steel watch. Her suit was a practical, sharp charcoal grey. Before her, dwarfing the pier, sat the Navigator, the first of Donovan Reed's fully autonomous, liquid natural gas-powered container ships. It was a behemoth of steel and code, a vessel that would, quite literally, change the world. A crowd of hundreds was gathered on the pier, the entire day-shift engineering team, union leaders, maritime press, and a visibly ecstatic Donovan Reed. Ilara stepped up to the microphone. There was no tremor in her hands, no hesitation in her voice. The mousy, accommodating +1 was a ghost, a shed skin. When my father, Robert Vance, founded this shipyard, she began, her clear voice projecting over the hum of the crowd, he did so with a simple creed: build it strong, build it right, and build it to last. He believed in the power of real work. He believed that what we do here, in the heat and the grime, is the engine of the modern world. He saw the ships, not just the balance sheets. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the welders and draftsmen in the front rows. For the last few years, our company has operated from the shadows. We honored my father's wish for privacy. But today, we honor his legacy of innovation. The Navigator is not just a ship. It is a promise. It is the result of thousands of hours, of brilliant minds and calloused hands working in concert to build something the world has never seen. Vance Maritime is not just building ships. We are building the future. The applause was thunderous, genuine. Donovan Reed, taking the podium next, was even more effusive. I've worked with shipyards all over the world, he boomed. No one has the integrity, the vision and the sheer competence of Ilara Vance and her team. She is a giant, and I am honored to be her partner." Ilara simply nodded, a small professional smile on her lips. She had just publicly cemented a $50 billion contract. Later, as the press swarmed the new ship, Ilara stood with Marcus Cole in the quiet of the main observation tower, watching the organized chaos below. "The launch was flawless, boss," Marcus said, handing her a tablet. "The launch was the easy part," Ilara replied, her eyes already scanning the next dry dock. "The real test is the Pacific crossing. How is the Sterling fleet integration?" 95% complete, Marcus said, tapping the screen. "We've refitted the last of Henry's rust buckets. The entire fleet is now profitable. As for Henry, he accepted our retirement package. He's living in a very quiet, very modest condo in Boca." "And Victoria?" Ilara asked, her voice neutral. Marcus permitted himself a small, dry smile. She did not take it well. She tried to sue. She sued you for emotional distress, her father for mismanagement, and Mr. Reed for conspiracy. The courts threw out all 3 cases. Her legal bills, which she couldn't pay, forced her to sell her penthouse. Last I heard, she was living with an aunt in Palm Beach and trying to launch a lifestyle brand on Instagram. It has 17 followers. Ilara processed this, her face unreadable. There was no triumph, only a quiet finality, a predictable outcome. And the other one? She never used Julian's name. He was simply the other one. "The divorce was finalized last week," Marcus reported, his tone all business. He and his legal team were loud. They demanded half of everything. They postured. They threatened. And I presented them with the consolidated file. Not just the evidence of his wire fraud and embezzlement of your trust fund, but the affidavits from 2 of his former partners attesting to the fact that he'd been running a Ponzi scheme for 3 years. His entire firm was a house of cards. Ilara's blood ran cold just for a second. It was worse than she'd even known. His lawyers, Marcus continued, advised him to accept your generous offer. Which was? We pay for his one-way bus ticket to Omaha, Nebraska, where his mother lives. We do not press federal charges. He signs away any and all claims to your name, your assets, and your company forever. He is legally barred from coming within 500 miles of Miami. He signed. It wasn't a question. He signed, Marcus confirmed. He is, as of this morning, working in a call center for a subprime auto lender. He's gone, Ilara. A ghost. Ilara turned from the window and looked at the man who had been her father's right hand, and was now hers. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. Just protecting the company, boss, he said, though his eyes were kind. That evening, Ilara didn't go back to the sprawling house in Coconut Grove. Instead, she drove her father's old Range Rover to the Miami Maritime Museum. It was closed to the public, but the director, an old family friend, let her in. She walked through the silent halls, past the old maps and sextants, until she stood in front of a brand-new, gleaming glass wing. A simple plaque was on the wall, the Robert Vance Pavilion for Maritime Studies. Inside, it wasn't a stuffy collection of relics. It was a vibrant, high-tech STEM lab. Interactive screens showed the physics of displacement. A wave tank simulated hull integrity. It was designed for the city's underprivileged students, a place to learn a real, tangible trade, a place to learn how to build. She stood there for a long time, her hand on the cool glass. This was his legacy, not the money, not the power. This, the act of creation. She found the exhibit she'd been looking for in the old wing. It was a dusty, forgotten model of a 19th century clipper ship. She had, in fact, been dusting it the day Julian Thorne had walked in, all predatory charm and expensive cologne. She remembered the conversation. He'd said, "You must be so bored, all these old dusty things." She'd replied, "I'm not. I think they're beautiful. They changed the world." He'd laughed, a smooth, condescending sound. "Well, I'm here to change the world in a different way. And you're too beautiful to be dusting someone else's memories." He had never, she realized, seen her at all. He had seen a beautiful, simple, uncomplicated backdrop for his own ambition. He had seen a prop. He hadn't seen the woman who could, on that very day, have bought and sold his entire firm with a single phone call. He hadn't seen the woman who understood the complex engineering of the very ship she was dusting. She felt a sudden, profound pity for him. Not for the call center employee in Omaha, but for the man on that yacht. He had been so blind, so desperate for the appearance of power, that he had never once stopped to feel the substance of it. She left the museum and drove to the shipyard. The night shift was in full swing, the yard ablaze with floodlights, a man-made constellation. She took the industrial elevator to the very top of the main gantry crane, 500 feet in the air. The wind up here was fierce, whipping her hair from its ponytail. But she stood unbothered, her hands on the steel rail. The view was breathtaking. To the east, the glittering artificial skyline of Miami. To the west, the dark, sprawling, sleeping city. And below her, the yard. Her yard, a symphony of fire and steel. "He never came up here, did he?" Marcus had come up behind her, holding 2 hard hats. She took hers and put it on. "Once," she said, her voice almost lost in the wind. "He said the view was industrial. He wanted to know why I wasn't looking at the skyline." Marcus nodded, looking out at the city. "The skyline is where the money is kept. This," he swept his hand over the yard, "is where it's made." "He saw the grime, not the ships," Ilara said, her eyes fixed on a welder's torch, a brilliant blue star in the dark. "He saw the work, but he never understood the worth." She took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and the sea. The humiliation of that night was gone. The anger was gone. The marriage was a footnote, a lesson in due diligence. She was not her father's heir. She was not Julian's ex-wife. She was Ilara Vance, the woman who owned the shipyard, and as the night shift began its long, loud, powerful work, she turned her back to the glittering, hollow city and faced the fire. The story of Ilara Vance and Julian Thorne is a powerful, painful reminder that a person's worth is never determined by the labels others try to put on them. Julian, blinded by his own ambition, saw his wife as poor and simple, failing to see the immense strength and power she held in silence. He built his life on a foundation of lies and arrogance, only to watch it all crumble when the truth, in the form of his humble wife, was finally revealed. Ilara, forced to choose between a toxic marriage and her father's legacy, found that her greatest power wasn't just in her name or her company, but in the dignity she refused to sacrifice. What did you think of Julian's downfall? Was Ilara's revenge too harsh, or exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and shocking twists, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a story of justice being served. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was his elegant, intelligent wife, the silent architect of his empire. But in the glittering, hollow world of New York's elite, loyalty is a commodity, and respect is a luxury not everyone can afford. One fateful night, at the city's most prestigious charity gala, under the watchful eyes of the powerful and the privileged, he made a choice. To appease his new flame, a woman draped in diamonds and ambition, he raised his hand to the wife who had built him. A single, sharp slap that echoed louder than the orchestra. He thought it was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end, because while he slept soundly that night, she was igniting a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The Starlight Charity Gala was the apex of the Manhattan social calendar, a glittering spectacle held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. To the outside world, Damien and Catherine Blackwood were the evening's reigning couple. He, the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd built from the ground up, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a cold, calculating blue, and his smile a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. Catherine, his wife of 10 years, was his perfect counterpart, or so it seemed. Graceful and poised, with intelligent hazel eyes that saw far more than they let on, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for meekness. She wore an emerald silk gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had been the first investor in Damien's dream, not with money, but with intellect. Her Wharton MBA and razor-sharp strategic mind had transformed his raw coding talent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had drafted the business plans, navigated the early-stage funding rounds, and architected the corporate structure. He was the face. She was the foundation. A foundation he had begun to treat as little more than pavement to be trod upon. The source of that disrespect was currently clinging to his arm, a vibrant slash of crimson in the muted elegance of the ballroom. Her name was Serafina Munro, a model-turned-influencer whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as the stilettos on her feet. She laughed a little too loudly, her scarlet lips perpetually curved in a predatory smile. She was everything Catherine was not, ostentatious, demanding, and utterly transparent in her desires. And Damien, a man terrified of losing the status he'd fought so ruthlessly to attain, was utterly captivated by her public performance of adoration. "Darling," Serafina purred, her fingers tracing the lapel of Damien's Tom Ford tuxedo. "Mr. Abernathy from the Times is watching us. We should give him something to write about." She tilted her head towards a corner where several high-profile investors, including the notoriously shrewd Robert Chen of Chen Capital, were in conversation. "Go on, Damien. Remind them who the king of this city is." Damien's chest puffed out. He thrived on such validation. Catherine watched, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. She saw the subtle way he preened under Serafina's gaze, the way he subtly angled his body away from her, his own wife, as if she were a relic of a past he was eager to shed. "In a moment, my dear," Damien said, his eyes scanning the room. "First, I need to ensure everything is perfect." His gaze fell on Catherine. "Catherine, did you confirm the seating arrangement with the event planner? I specifically said I wanted to be at the same table as Senator Thompson." "Yes, Damien," Catherine replied, her voice calm and even, betraying none of her inner turmoil. "We are at table 1, with the Senator and Mrs. Thompson, as you requested. I confirmed it myself an hour ago." Serafina let out a small, condescending laugh, always so efficient, aren't we? Like a perfect little assistant. The barb struck its target. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Serafina the satisfaction of a reaction. Damien, however, either missed the malice or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on his own performance. For the next hour, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She engaged in polite conversation about art auctions and summering in the Hamptons. She deflected intrusive questions about Damien's latest, rumored acquisition with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. All the while, she was acutely aware of Damien and Serafina, a garish duo moving through the crowd. She saw him whisper in Serafina's ear, saw the possessive hand he placed on the small of her back, a public declaration for all to see. The tension finally snapped later in the evening, near the marbled archway leading to the terrace. Catherine had been speaking with Marcus Thorne, the COO of Blackwood Innovations, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of her contributions to the company. "The quarterly projections are looking aggressive, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice low. "Damien is pushing the R&D department to its limits. I'm worried we're heading for a bubble." "I've seen the data, Marcus," she said quietly. "He's chasing headlines, not sustainable growth. I've warned him." "He doesn't listen to anyone anymore," Marcus lamented, his gaze flicking nervously towards Damien, who was approaching them with Serafina in tow. "What are you two whispering about?" Damien's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "Just discussing the quarterly numbers, Damien," Marcus said quickly. Serafina slid her arm around Damien's waist. "Don't let them bore you with business, darling. It's a party." She then looked directly at Catherine, her eyes glittering with malice. "You know, Catherine, you should really try to enjoy yourself. You look so tense. It adds years to your face." Catherine met her gaze, her composure unwavering. "Thank you for your concern, Serafina. But I find that worrying about the health of a $10 billion company is a more productive use of my time than worrying about a few wrinkles." The comeback was swift, precise, and it hit its mark. A flicker of fury crossed Serafina's perfectly made-up face. She turned to Damien, her lower lip trembling theatrically. "Damien, did you hear that? She's insulting me. She's always so cold, so superior." Damien's face darkened. In his mind, Catherine's sharp intellect, once his greatest asset, had become a threat. Her quiet competence felt like a judgment on his loud insecurities. Serafina's manufactured vulnerability was a balm to his fragile ego. He looked from Serafina's pouting face to Catherine's calm, unreadable expression. In front of Marcus, in front of anyone who might be watching from the periphery, he needed to assert his authority. He needed to prove who held the power. "Apologize to her, Catherine," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Catherine's blood ran cold. "I will not. I have nothing to apologize for." I said, "Apologize." "No, Damien." It was her quiet defiance that broke him. It was the fact that she wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid. To him it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He saw Serafina looking at him, her eyes wide, waiting. He felt the phantom eyes of the entire New York elite upon him. In that single, terrible moment, his vanity and his cruelty won. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap was sharp, a brutal crack that cut through the murmur of the gala. Catherine's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on her cheek like a hot, poisonous flower. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus Thorne froze, his face a mask of horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a pocket of stunned disbelief in the heart of the opulent ballroom. Catherine slowly turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. She looked at Damien, not as her husband, but as a stranger, an enemy. She saw the flicker of shock in his own eyes, as if his hand had acted of its own accord, quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive glare. She looked at Serafina, who had the decency to look momentarily stunned before a flicker of triumph settled in her eyes. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. Her back was straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her away from the wreckage of her marriage, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces, and out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air. Damien watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance. He turned to a shaken Serafina and forced a smile. "Now, where were we?" he asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. He had no idea that the sound of that slap was not an ending, but the starting pistol for a war he was utterly unprepared to fight. The taxi ride from the Pierre to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of city lights smearing against the cold glass. Catherine sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed against the lingering, phantom heat on her cheek. The sting had subsided, replaced by a profound and chilling numbness. It was the numbness of a limb that has been severed, the shock preceding the agony. She felt strangely disconnected from the woman in the emerald gown, the woman who had just been publicly humiliated by her own husband. That woman was a character she had played for a decade. Tonight, the performance had ended. When the taxi pulled up to the imposing limestone facade of their building, the doorman, a kind-faced man named George, rushed to open her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood. You're home early." His eyes widened slightly as he saw her face, the faint red mark just beginning to bloom on her cheekbone. To his credit, his professional mask didn't slip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, George. Thank you," she said, her voice a monotone. But as she walked across the marble lobby, she knew nothing would ever be fine again. The private elevator opened directly into their penthouse. It was a monument to Damien's success, a sprawling space of glass, chrome, and minimalist furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and curated for magazine spreads. It had never felt like a home. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, her heels clicking an unnervingly loud rhythm on the polished concrete floors. She didn't cry. The time for tears felt 1,000 miles away. What she felt instead was a slow, creeping rage, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a wounded animal. It was the focused, calculating fury of a grandmaster whose opponent has just made a fatal, unforgivable blunder. The slap wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst. It was the physical manifestation of 1,000 smaller betrayals, 1,000,000 moments of being diminished, ignored, and taken for granted. It was the culmination of every time he had taken credit for her ideas, dismissed her concerns as nagging, and paraded his affairs as trophies of his masculine prowess. He hadn't just struck her, he had tried to erase her. She walked into their shared walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. On one side were Damien's meticulously organized rows of designer suits and shoes. On the other, her own collection of elegant, understated pieces. She ignored them all. She went to the back, to a locked safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. She keyed in the code, not their anniversary, not his birthday, but the date she had finalized the patent for the core algorithm that had launched Blackwood Innovations. An algorithm she had written. Inside the safe were her personal documents, some jewelry, and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. She took only the hard drive and a single, slim folio of documents. She then walked into the master bedroom and took a small, leather-bound journal from her nightstand. It was filled with her handwriting, notes, ideas, and strategic plans for the company, many of which Damien had later presented as his own. She didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. That was what a fleeing victim did. She was not a victim. She was a combatant preparing for battle. She took only a single, expensive-looking leather duffel bag. Into it, she placed the hard drive, the journal, the folio, her laptop, and a toiletry bag with only the essentials. The emerald gown she was wearing felt like a costume from another life. She stripped it off, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She changed into a simple, severe black pantsuit, a crisp white silk blouse, and practical, low-heeled Chanel pumps. It was armor. Her phone buzzed. It was Damien. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Texts began to pour in. "Catherine, where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting." The final one, sent minutes later, was the most telling. "Don't do anything stupid. Think of the company's reputation." His reputation. Not her pain, not their marriage. The company, the entity she had built. A bitter smile touched her lips. Oh, she was thinking of the company. She was thinking of it very, very carefully. She made one phone call. Jessica Riley, a sharp, alert voice, answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Jessica was her oldest friend, a shark of a divorce lawyer from the prestigious firm of Cromwell, Stern and Vance. The Vance was her father. "Jess, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? I heard what happened at the gala. My colleague David was there. He called me." "Are you okay?" "He slapped me, Jess. In public." Catherine's voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice turned to steel. "Where are you?" "At the penthouse. I'm leaving now." "Good. Don't engage with him. Don't answer his calls. Where are you going?" "I've booked a suite at the Carlyle, under my maiden name." Vance. The name felt good on her tongue. It was her own. "Okay. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. We'll start the paperwork." "No," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about divorce papers. Not yet. That's a skirmish. I'm planning a war." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing. She knew Catherine better than anyone. She knew her friend's calm exterior hid a formidable intellect and an iron will. "Okay," she said slowly. "What's the first move?" "I'm going to need you to look over a non-disclosure agreement. A very, very restrictive one. And I need to get in touch with an old acquaintance. I need you to find the best way to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. An urgent one." She took a deep breath. "The name is Alexander Sterling, of Sterling Capital." Jessica let out a low whistle. Alexander Sterling was a legend on Wall Street, a so-called vulture capitalist to his enemies, a visionary investor to his allies. His firm was known for aggressive, often hostile, takeovers of undervalued or poorly managed tech companies. They were also Blackwood Innovation's most feared competitor. "Sterling," Jessica said, her voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Kat, what are you planning?" "Damien thinks the company is his greatest strength," Catherine said, walking towards the elevator, her duffel bag in hand. "He's about to find out that it's his greatest vulnerability. And I know where all the cracks are. After all, I'm the one who papered over them." She ended the call, stepped into the elevator, and descended from the glass tower for the last time. As the door slid shut, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. The woman staring back at her was not the broken wife of Damien Blackwood. It was Catherine Vance, and she was ready to reclaim everything he had taken from her, and more. The shattering was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The Carlisle Hotel, with its old-world elegance and discreet service, was a world away from the cold modernity of Damien's penthouse. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, the perfect staging ground for what was to come. Catherine's suite, registered under the name Vance, was opulent but comforting, with heavy silk curtains and classic furniture that seemed to absorb the sounds and chaos of the city outside. She didn't sleep. Fueled by adrenaline and 2 decades of suppressed ambition, she worked through the night. Her laptop was open, the encrypted hard drive connected. On the screen were the unvarnished truths of Blackwood Innovations, not the polished PR-spun versions presented to shareholders, but the raw data, suppressed R&D failures, over-leveraged acquisitions, and most damningly, a series of creative accounting practices Damien had insisted upon to inflate their quarterly earnings. Catherine had argued against them, warning that they were a house of cards. Now she was grateful for his arrogance. He had handed her the very wind she needed to blow it all down. Beside the laptop lay her leather-bound journal. She methodically cross-referenced her handwritten notes, strategic plans, market analysis, software architecture ideas, with the company's official development roadmaps. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of key innovations, patents and strategic partnerships that Damien had publicly claimed as his own vision had originated in detail from her private notes. She had been the ghost in his machine, the architect of his throne. At 7 a.m. Jessica arrived, looking sharp and alert in a navy blue suit. She carried a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Catherine, her eyes scanning her friend's face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury for peacetime, Jess," Catherine replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Did you make the call?" Jessica nodded, setting her briefcase on the mahogany desk. "It wasn't easy. Alexander Sterling's schedule is locked down tighter than Fort Knox, but the name Vance, coupled with urgent, time-sensitive intelligence on Blackwood Innovations, got his attention. He's cleared his calendar. We have a meeting at his office, 10 a.m. sharp." "Good," Catherine said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "That gives us time to prepare the presentation." "Kat, are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her professional caution warring with her personal loyalty. "Going to Sterling. It's like handing a starving wolf the keys to the henhouse. Once you let him in, you can't control what he does." "I'm not looking for control, Jess. I'm looking for a wrecking ball," Catherine stated coldly. "Damien respects only one thing: power, financial power. I'm going to bring a power to his door, so overwhelming that he'll have no choice but to bow. Alexander Sterling is not a partner. He is a weapon." She turned the laptop screen towards Jessica. For the next 2 hours, Catherine walked her friend through the vulnerabilities of Blackwood Innovations. She spoke with a passion and authority Jessica hadn't seen in years. This was the Catherine from Wharton, the brilliant strategist who could dissect a balance sheet like a surgeon. She explained how Damien's aggressive push into volatile markets had left the company dangerously exposed, how the inflated profit margins were hiding a growing debt crisis, and how their most recent flagship product, the Prometheus AI, was built on a flawed and unstable code base, a shortcut Damien had demanded against her explicit advice. "He's running a multi-billion-dollar company like a gambler on a hot streak," Catherine concluded, her voice steely. "But the streak is about to end, and I have the data to prove it." At 9:30 a.m. they left the Carlisle. Catherine wore the same black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. The faint bruise on her cheek was visible, unconcealed by makeup. It was not a mark of shame. It was a testament, a piece of evidence. Sterling Capital was located in a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass needle aimed at the heavens. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and hushed reverence. They were escorted to the top floor, to Alexander Sterling's private office. The man himself was waiting. Alexander Sterling was in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the antithesis of Damien. Where Damien was loud, Sterling was quiet. Where Damien wore his wealth like a costume, Sterling wore his bespoke suit with an air of complete, unstudied indifference. He radiated a calm, predatory confidence that was far more intimidating than Damien's bluster. He did not smile as they entered. He simply watched, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chairs opposite his vast, uncluttered desk. "Your lawyer's message was intriguing." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the mark on her cheek, but his expression remained impassive. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I believe I have information that will be of significant value to you and your firm." She didn't wait for permission. She placed her laptop on the desk, opened it, and began. She didn't speak of her marriage, of the gala, of the slap. She spoke the language he understood, numbers, data, and strategy. She laid bare the weaknesses of Blackwood Innovations with clinical precision. She presented the inflated earnings reports next to the real, grim figures from her hard drive. She detailed the structural flaws in the Prometheus AI, predicting a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months that would trigger a massive stock devaluation. Finally, she brought up her masterstroke. Damien is currently in final negotiations to acquire a smaller AI firm, Cygnus AI, for $2 billion, she explained, displaying the confidential deal memo she had downloaded. He sees it as a vanity project, but my analysis shows that Cygnus AI's patent portfolio, when combined with Blackwood's existing infrastructure, doesn't create synergy. It creates a redundancy that will cost $500 million in restructuring alone. He is paying a premium for a company whose core technology will be obsolete within 18 months. He is hemorrhaging capital for ego. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. He had not interrupted her once. He had simply listened, his sharp eyes following every chart, every projection. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "You're suggesting Blackwood is a house of cards." "I'm stating it as a fact," Catherine corrected him gently. "And I'm offering you the opportunity to be the one holding the fan when it comes time to blow." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his gaze analytical, searching. "Why come to me? You're his wife. A messy divorce. You could take him for half. Why burn the whole kingdom down?" For the first time, Catherine allowed a flicker of personal history to enter her voice. "Because I helped build that kingdom, Mr. Sterling, and my name is not on a single brick. Damien Blackwood believes he is the sole architect. He has forgotten the importance of a strong foundation. I am not here for alimony. I'm not here for a settlement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "I am here for equity. I will provide you with the blueprint to acquire his company at a fraction of its current market value. In return, when Sterling Capital takes control, I want a senior executive position, a seat on the new board, and a significant stake in the restructured company. I am not selling my revenge, Mr. Sterling. I am leveraging my intellectual property." Alexander Sterling looked at her, and for the first time, a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. He wasn't looking at a scorned wife. He was looking at his next, and perhaps most brilliant, business partner. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a hand across the desk. "I believe we have a deal." Damien Blackwood arrived at the headquarters of Blackwood Innovations at 9 a.m., feeling triumphant. The night had been a blur of champagne and fawning admirers after Catherine's dramatic exit. Serafina had been suitably impressed by his show of strength, and her flattery had soothed his bruised ego. He'd woken up that morning with a mild hangover and a sense of righteous indignation. Catherine's disobedience had been a public embarrassment, but he had handled it. He had put her in her place. He expected she was holed up in some hotel, crying, ready to come crawling back with a tearful apology. He'd make her sweat for a day or two before graciously allowing her to return. He strode through the gleaming lobby, nodding curtly at the employees who scurried out of his way. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," they'd murmur. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Clara, met him at his office door. "Good morning, sir. The board members are assembling for the 10 a.m. emergency meeting you called." "Excellent," Damien said, tossing his coat onto a chair. He'd called the meeting to fast-track the Cygnus AI acquisition, a move that would splash his face across every business journal. It was the perfect way to bury the gossip from last night's gala under a headline of corporate conquest. "Any messages?" "Your wife's lawyer called, sir. Jessica Riley," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "She said to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that Miss Vance, would be attending the board meeting." Damien laughed, a short, sharp bark. "What? Is she coming to apologize in front of the board? A little dramatic, even for her." He dismissed the thought. She was probably bluffing, trying to rattle him. Fine, let her come. It will be educational for her. At precisely 10 a.m., Damien entered the boardroom on the 50th floor. The room was designed to intimidate, with a long, black granite table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. His board was assembled, a collection of stern, grey-haired men he'd carefully selected for their pliability. Marcus Thorne, the COO, sat among them, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Damien's eye. "Good morning, gentlemen," Damien began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I've called you here today to finalize our acquisition of—" The boardroom doors swung open. Damien stopped mid-sentence, an annoyed frown forming on his face. And then he saw her. Catherine stood in the doorway. She was not the woman he had slapped last night. This was a different person entirely. Dressed in her severe black suit, her face composed and resolute, she radiated an aura of unshakable power. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, silent accusation. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Alexander Sterling. A wave of confusion and alarm rippled through the boardroom. Alexander Sterling was their rival, their boogeyman, the shark that circled their waters. His presence here was inexplicable, a violation of the natural order. "Catherine?" Damien stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Good morning, Damien." "Gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady as she walked into the room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's attention. Alexander Sterling stood slightly behind her, a silent, imposing presence. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here today not as your wife, Damien, but as a representative of a new business proposal. Mr. Sterling is here as my associate." Damien gaped at her. Business proposal? What are you talking about? This is a private board meeting. It's about to become a very public one if you don't listen, Catherine said calmly. She nodded to Jessica Riley, who had followed them in, and began handing a thick, bound document to each board member. Please take a look at the portfolio in front of you. It's an offer from Sterling Capital. The board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue, began to flip through the pages. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Damien stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. An offer? An offer for what? This is absurd. Security, get them out of here. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackwood. Alexander Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. Because the document your board is currently reading is a preliminary, but very generous, tender offer to acquire a controlling interest in Blackwood Innovations. The blood drained from Damien's face. Acquire? You can't. Our stock is at an all-time high. Our valuation is a fantasy, Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. And that is why I am here. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine systematically and dispassionately dismantled the company she had helped build. She projected charts and figures onto the room's main screen from her laptop. She exposed the creative accounting, the hidden debt, the precarious market position. She walked them through the technical flaws of the Prometheus AI, predicting its inevitable and costly failure. Her delivery was flawless, her command of the facts absolute. The board members stared, mesmerized and horrified, as the woman they had only ever known as the CEO's quiet, pretty wife revealed herself to be the true master of their company's universe. And finally, Catherine said, her gaze locking onto Damien's, the Cygnus AI acquisition. She displayed the internal memo on the screen. A $2 billion vanity project that will indebt this company for a decade to acquire redundant technology. An act of such profound fiscal irresponsibility that it borders on corporate malfeasance. Robert Chen, the investor who had been present at the gala, looked up from the portfolio, his face grim. The offer from Sterling Capital is 30% above current market value. Given the irregularities Ms. Vance has just presented, this isn't just a generous offer. It's a lifeline. This is ridiculous, Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. She's a liar, a bitter, scorned woman trying to destroy me. He turned on Catherine. You did this? To get back at me for last night? Catherine looked him dead in the eye. The entire room held its breath. Last night was not the reason, Damien, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. It was merely the permission slip I gave myself to do what was necessary. You built this company on my intellect, my strategies and my work. And when you were done, you decided I was disposable. She gestured to the board. I am simply demonstrating my value. The value you forgot. She turned back to the stunned board members. Gentlemen, Sterling Capital's offer is on the table for the next 48 hours. It is conditional on the immediate removal of Damien Blackwood as CEO and the cessation of the Cygnus AI acquisition. Should you accept, I will be overseeing the transition as part of the new management team. I know where the bodies are buried. I also know where the treasure is. She closed her laptop. The presentation was over. Damien stood, shaking with a rage that rendered him speechless. He looked at the faces of his board, men he thought he owned, and saw not loyalty, but cold, hard calculation. He saw them looking from his trembling form to Catherine's steel composure, and he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that he had already lost. Catherine and Alexander Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a bomb of their own making to detonate behind them. The fallout from the boardroom blitz was swift and brutal. Damien's world, once an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power, began to crumble with terrifying speed. He stormed out of the boardroom after Catherine and Sterling, his mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He tried to rally his board, appealing to their loyalty, to their shared history, but it was useless. He was no longer speaking to friends. He was speaking to businessmen who had just been shown a lifeboat as their ship was taking on water. "Damien, be reasonable," Robert Chen had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The woman just proved with data that our stock is overvalued by at least 40%. Sterling is offering a premium on that inflated price. If we refuse, and this information leaks, which it inevitably will, we'll be facing shareholder lawsuits that will tie us up in court for years. She's checkmated you." His first frantic call was to Serafina. He needed her comfort, her validation, her adoration. He found her at her apartment, surrounded by packed Louis Vuitton luggage. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Are you going somewhere?" Serafina didn't look up from a box of jewelry she was sorting. "I'm going to Milan for a few weeks. A new contract," she said, her tone cool and distant. "Milan? Now? I need you here," he exclaimed. "Catherine, she's trying to destroy me. She went to Alexander Sterling." Serafina finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I heard. It's all over the financial news feeds already. Sterling Capital launches hostile takeover bid for Blackwood Innovations." She shrugged, a delicate, dismissive gesture. "It sounds messy." "Messy? It's a war. And I need you by my side. We're a power couple, remember?" A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Damien, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We were a power couple when you had power. I attached myself to a rising star, not a falling one. A CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover, with his brilliant wife leading the charge against him. That's not a good look. It's embarrassing." The word hit him harder than the slap he'd delivered to Catherine. Embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He realized with sickening clarity that he had never been more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Her affection had been a transaction, and his value had just plummeted. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, snapping the jewelry box shut. "Think of it as a strategic retreat. Call me when you've sorted out all of this." She brushed past him, her expensive perfume a final, cloying insult. He knew she would never answer his call. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. His next blow came from within his own company. He tried to lock down the company's servers, to hide the evidence Catherine had presented, but it was too late. He received a call from Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I need you to initiate a digital lockdown. Erase the R&D logs from the last 6 months. Shred the quarterly variance reports." "I can't do that, Damien." Marcus's voice was firm, laced with a new kind of confidence. "What do you mean you can't? I'm still the CEO of this company. You work for me." "No, Damien, I work for the company, for the shareholders. And right now, the best thing for this company is a smooth transition of power," Marcus said. There was a pause. "I've already provided Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling's legal team with the supplementary data they requested. The server logs, the internal emails, all of it. It corroborates her entire presentation." The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that Damien couldn't even speak. Marcus, his loyal COO, the man he'd promoted and trusted for years, had turned on him. "Why, Marcus?" he finally whispered. "Because she was right," Marcus said simply. "About everything. about the flawed code, about the Cygnus deal, about you. You stopped listening a long time ago, Damien. You were going to run this company into the ground out of sheer ego. Catherine, Ms. Vance, she's saving it, and all of our jobs along with it. I'm sorry, but my loyalty is to the house she built, not to the man who was trying to burn it down. The final nail in his coffin was the media. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire CEO's wife teams with rival to seize control of empire, screamed the headlines. They painted Catherine as a wronged genius, a strategic mastermind reclaiming her legacy. They dug into her past, her academic achievements at Wharton, her early, uncredited role in the company's founding. She became a feminist icon overnight. Damien, in contrast, was portrayed as a fool and a brutish tyrant, the man who slapped his wife and lost his empire in the same week. The photo of Catherine leaving the gala, her face resolute, was plastered everywhere. The faint bruise was a symbol of his downfall. He holed up in his penthouse, the glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of his dominance, now feeling like a cage. He watched the stock ticker for Blackwood Innovations. The board, facing overwhelming pressure, had publicly announced they were entering into negotiations with Sterling Capital. The stock price, after a brief, panicked dip, had soared on the news of the acquisition and the promise of new, competent leadership. He was undone, utterly and completely. He had underestimated the woman who stood beside him for 10 years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her grace for weakness. He had thought she was an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed and, when necessary, disciplined. He never realized she was the queen, and he had just been a pawn in her long, patient game. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the final, crushing silence of defeat. The 48 hours that followed the boardroom meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and high-stakes negotiations. But the outcome was never in doubt. With Marcus Thorne's cooperation and the irrefutable data Catherine had provided, the board of Blackwood Innovations had no choice. They voted unanimously to accept Sterling Capital's offer. Damien Blackwood was officially and ignominiously terminated as CEO, forced to sell his shares as part of the deal. He was given a severance package dictated by the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had insisted upon years ago, an agreement he had laughed at the time. It protected all premarital assets and intellectual property. As she was the source of nearly all the company's foundational IP, he was left with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was just another wealthy, forgotten casualty of Wall Street. The day the deal was finalized, Catherine walked back into the headquarters of the company she had built, not as the CEO's wife, but as the new Chief Strategy Officer and a member of the Board of Directors for the newly formed entity, Sterling Blackwood. The atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once averted their eyes from her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was no longer a phantom in the hallways. She was the acknowledged power. Her first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting. Standing on a stage in the building's atrium, she looked out at the hundreds of faces staring up at her. She didn't gloat. She didn't mention Damien's name. She spoke of the future. For too long, this company has chased short-term gains and fleeting headlines, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. We have prioritized image over innovation, ego over excellence. That era is over. Starting today, we are returning to the principles that once made us great: sustainable growth, fearless research, and a commitment to building technology that lasts. She laid out her vision, a clear, concise, and brilliant roadmap for the company's next 5 years. She announced the immediate cancellation of the disastrous, Cygnus AI acquisition, redirecting the funds into internal R&D and promoting several talented engineers whom Damien had overlooked. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge and a clarity of purpose that left no one in doubt as to who was now in charge. Marcus Thorne, who she had promoted to president and COO, stood by her side, a look of profound respect on his face. Later that day, she met with Alexander Sterling in her new office, the very office Damien had once occupied. It was already being transformed. The cold, minimalist furniture was being replaced with warmer, more functional pieces. The ostentatious modern art was gone, replaced with whiteboards covered in strategic diagrams. "A good first day, Miss Vance," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Please call me Catherine," she replied, looking up from a budget report. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a small smile. "The markets have responded well. The analysts are calling this the most elegant corporate takeover in a decade." "It wasn't about elegance," she said, her expression serious. "It was about correction, restoring balance." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but you can't deny there's a certain poetry to it." He looked at her, his usual predatory gaze softened by something else. Admiration. "I've acquired dozens of companies in my career. It's usually a bloody, messy affair. But with you, it was like watching a surgeon at work. You didn't use a cudgel, you used a scalpel." "Damien was the architect of his own downfall," Catherine said, unwilling to take full credit for his self-destruction. "I simply pointed out the structural flaws to the demolition team." Alexander chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "A modest surgeon, then. I have a feeling this is going to be a very profitable partnership, Catherine." Their relationship remained strictly professional, yet a powerful current of mutual respect flowed between them. He valued her intellect, her foresight, her unwavering composure. She valued his decisiveness, his vast resources, and the fact that he never once underestimated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a brilliant mind, a formidable ally. For Catherine, after a decade of being treated as an accessory, that respect was more valuable than any romance. That evening, she did not return to a hotel suite. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, a place with character and warmth, filled with books and art that she loved. It was hers, bought with the first payment from her new, staggering salary and signing bonus. As she unlocked her own front door, carrying a bag of groceries, a sense of profound peace washed over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her company, she was reclaiming her life, her name, her identity. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down and reforged into a key. The new dawn wasn't just for Sterling Blackwood. It was for Catherine Vance. And it was just beginning. 6 months passed. The transition at Sterling Blackwood was not just smooth, it was transformative. Under Catherine's strategic guidance and Marcus's operational management, the company flourished. She dismantled Damien's reckless projects, stabilized the company's finances, and fostered a new culture of genuine innovation. The flawed Prometheus AI was scrapped, and a new, more stable and powerful version, codenamed Phoenix, was already in development. Built on the solid foundation of her original architectural plans, the company's stock price didn't just recover, it reached unprecedented new heights. Catherine Vance became a legend in the business world. She was the subject of a glowing cover story in Forbes magazine, titled "The Architect: How Catherine Vance Rebuilt Her Empire." The article detailed her quiet but crucial role in the founding of Blackwood Innovations and her masterful strategy in seizing control. The accompanying photograph was of her in the new boardroom, poised and powerful, with Alexander Sterling looking on with clear admiration. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Damien. He was now a footnote in her story. Her relationship with Alexander had deepened into a formidable professional partnership and a quiet, budding friendship. They were intellectual equals who challenged and respected one another. There were hints of something more, shared dinners that lasted for hours, conversations that strayed from business to art, philosophy, and their pasts. But they were in no rush. For the first time in a long time, Catherine was building something for herself, on her own terms, and she was savoring every moment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Damien Blackwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe in a quiet, forgotten corner of Soho. His world had shrunk dramatically. The sycophants and hangers-on had vanished along with his CEO title. His invitations to galas and exclusive parties had dried up. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very events he once dominated. Serafina had never called. He'd seen her once, photographed on the arm of a much older, much richer European industrialist. She hadn't even given him a second glance. He was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw it. The cover of Forbes. He stared at the image of Catherine, his Catherine, looking more regal and confident than he had ever seen her. He read the headline, "The Architect." The word twisted in his gut. He read excerpts from the article, quotes from Marcus Thorne praising her vision, from industry analysts lauding her genius, from Alexander Sterling calling her his most valuable asset. There was a small, bitter paragraph about him, describing him as the ousted founder whose aggressive but reckless leadership had nearly ruined the company. He was the villain in her heroic tale. As he sat there, a wave of cold, hard clarity washed over him. He had never truly seen her. He had seen a wife, an assistant, a reflection of his own success. He had never seen the brilliant, formidable woman who had been standing beside him all along, holding up the pillars of his kingdom. The slap had not been a show of strength. It had been an act of catastrophic weakness, the desperate lashing out of an insecure man terrified of the power his wife quietly wielded. He looked up from his phone just as a black town car pulled up to the curb across the street. The rear door opened, and Catherine stepped out, followed by Alexander Sterling. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. They were heading into a renowned art gallery. She looked radiant, energized, free. She didn't see him. He was invisible to her now, a ghost from a past life she had shed completely. He watched as Alexander held the gallery door open for her, the gesture one of casual, genuine respect. As she passed through the doorway, she turned and gave him a smile, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for a decade as Mrs. Blackwood, but a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. Damien felt a profound, aching emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the realization of what he had truly lost. He hadn't just lost a company. He had thrown away the one person who had seen greatness in him and had dedicated her own genius to making it a reality. He had shattered the most valuable thing he ever had, not with a single slap, but with 1,000 cuts of ego and neglect. He was left with his diminished fortune and his cavernous, empty penthouse. She had the company, the respect of her peers, and a future she was building for herself. The final reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation or a shouted argument. It was this, a quiet, undeniable truth settling upon him in a lonely cafe. He had slapped his wife to please his mistress, and the next day she had arrived with an army and calmly, methodically, taken back the world she had built, and he had no one to blame but himself. And so, Catherine Vance's story becomes a powerful lesson in value, respect, and the quiet strength that so many people underestimate. It's a reminder that the silent partner in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength isn't about raising your voice or your hand, but about knowing your worth and having the courage to claim it. Damien Blackwood thought he was breaking his wife, but he only succeeded in breaking the chains that held back a titan. She didn't seek simple revenge. She sought reclamation, building a brighter future from the ashes of a painful past. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation? Was her boardroom takeover the ultimate power move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And of course, for more compelling stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.